Do not adjust your radios. You haven't found us by accident. I'm the listener, and welcome to the sound of fear. Tonight, our theme is the color red. Get creative with your interpretation. Could be a red rain slicker, red eyes. Let's not forget, blood is red too. Just like that, we have some callers. My listeners are so creative. I love it. Hello, Casey. You have a scary story about the Redlight District. I guess we're off to a good start. Casey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So, Redlight District, Amsterdam, sex, drugs, and, well, more sex and drugs. What kind of story am I getting into here?
You got the first part right. Sex and drugs, but the end is just plain terrifying.
Well, Casey, the airwaves are open, and I'm listening.
Me and my best friend Nick had just graduated college, and to celebrate, we planned a 3-week backpacking trip through Europe. We went over the Christmas break because we were broke, and it's cheaper to travel on the off-season. Plus, it meant smaller crowds at popular sightseeing spots. The trip started in London. We saw Big Ben and Buckingham Palace, ate fish and chips, and drank tons of beer. Then we took the Eurostar into Paris, where we went to the top of the Eiffel Tower, romantic I know, and walked along the River Seine, eating crepes and drinking coffee. It was along the River Seine we had our first weird encounter. Nick was walking alone behind me when a pretty young girl stopped him and in a thick accent told him he'd drop something. She knelt down in front of him and came up with a gold ring. Nick told her it wasn't his and kept walking, but she tugged him by the shirt and asked him to look at it. She said, "This is a very fine ring, probably worth a lot of money." Nick looked it over and agreed, but it wasn't his. She offered that it could be anybody's, but they were the ones lucky enough to find it. She asked Nick what he thought it was worth, and he guessed maybe $100. I knew he knew this was a scam, but I also knew that he thought she was cute and was going to try his best to get a date with her. The pretty girl agreed that it was worth $100 and suggested that they share the profit. She was in a hurry, but if Nick gave her $50, he could go get the $100 or more from a pawn shop. Nick countered by suggesting, "Why don't you keep the ring and I'll buy you 5 drinks instead?" He gave her his best smile, which I've told him before was creepy. She threw the ring in his face and marched off, insulted. I was laughing to tears, and Nick stood there a sec, picked up the ring, and chucked it into the Seine. I died. When I picked myself up off the floor, I realized he was really pissed. His college girlfriend had just broken up with him, and he had been striking out with the girls ever since. Now we're in Europe, in the off-season, and there's no partying going on, and the prettiest girl he'd seen so far tried to con him. I told him I'd buy him a beer and reassured him that tomorrow things would be different. Tomorrow we head to Amsterdam. The next morning, we got on a train, and by the afternoon we were pulling into Central Station. The sun was out, the weather was unseasonably warm. It was going to be a great 24 hours. Now, let me explain. This was 15 years ago, and America looked a lot different back then. Weed was very much illegal, and so were magic mushrooms. But in Amsterdam, you're free to partake as long as you consume the party favors in places called coffee shops. So, naturally, the first thing we did was make our way into the Redlight District, where most of these coffee shops can be found. The Redlight District is also home to strip clubs, adult theaters, and, shall we say, women of the night. Now, that wasn't what I was looking for, but Nick had other plans. We made it to our first coffee shop, smoked some of their fine flower, and sampled some of their magic tea, then set out to explore the amazing city. We crossed canals, dodged bicycles, and ate some great falafel. We perused sex shops, drank beer, and walked down the narrow alleyways where scantily clad women beckoned to us from behind glass windows. Sure, I looked, and maybe even entertained the idea. But in reality, I wasn't interested. Nick, on the other hand, was very much interested, and I had to literally pull him out of 3 different places. I suggested we go to a bar and pick up on some good old-fashioned tourists. It'd be more fun. By this time it was around midnight and the dance clubs were raging. We popped into a club that was packed. The music was blasting, the crowd was beautiful, and so were the lights and colors. Me and Nick made our way to the bar, when Nick locks eyes with this stunning girl. She had black wavy hair, full sensual lips, and the most green eyes I'd ever seen. My first thought was, why is she looking at Nick? I'm right here. But I checked my ego and encouraged him to go talk to her. He downed his beer and marched over to her. They talked for a few minutes, and I watched them like a creeper. He had her smiling and laughing. Then he signaled for me to follow them. Great, I thought. She has a friend for me. They were way ahead of me, but I was able to keep up and followed them down a long hall and through a door that led to an alley. The alley was dark and empty. I figured I went the wrong way, and I turned to go back in the club, but the door was locked. I started to get creeped out. I looked right and left with no options, just darkness. That's when someone called to me. Over here, he said. It was Nick, in the shadows with his new friend. The girl was all over him, kissing his neck and stuff. He held out his hand. It's yours, he smiled. I looked and it was a pill, probably Molly or something. Without thinking much about it, I swallowed it down and asked how we get back in. Nick said, we're not going back in. Stephanie has a place we can party. She has friends there, dude. Okay, I said, where to? Stephanie laughed and led us into the dark. We weaved through narrow alleys and away from the city lights. I should have been wary, but whatever we just took was starting to kick in, and I was starting to not care much about anything. My head was spinning, and my feet felt like lead. Nick didn't look so good either, but Stephanie kept smiling and pulling us along. Whenever Nick would stop and rest against a building, she'd kiss him, and he'd find the strength to keep following her. I did my best to keep up, but Stephanie noticed I was lagging, so she sat Nick on a bench and came to get me. Don't tell your friend, she said, and gave me a long, passionate kiss. Just a few more steps. I was so gone, I went along with it. She took my hand, grabbed Nick's, and dragged us into a small building. The room was small, about the size of a one-car garage. There was a tiny bed there, for one person and a dim red light. Sort of felt like being in a photo darkroom. She sat us on the bed, kissed us both again, and said, something that chilled me to the bone. She whispered, you guys did great. Then she disappeared behind a black door. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. I looked at Nick and he was out cold. I shook him as hard as I could, which wasn't very hard because my arms felt as heavy as stone. Then my vision went dark. The last thing I remember is the place filling with 4 or 5 big dudes. I woke up and was blinded by hot white lights. I looked around in the room and saw Nick sleeping in a bed next to me. We were in a hospital. I flagged down a nurse and she grabbed 2 cops who came in to get a statement from me. They wanted to know about Stephanie and the club and the drugs, everything. I told them what I could remember and they said they'd stick around to get a statement from Nick when he woke up. They turned to leave and I stopped them. I wanted to know what the hell happened to us. Stephanie is part of a ring of human traffickers. Some local cops spotted her taking us to that seedy room and followed. They called for backup and raided the place just as me and Nick passed out. It was a good thing too. These particular traffickers are known to sell men to farms, where we'd be held captive in tanks filled with leeches. Our purpose? To be a living source of blood for the leeches, till they got fat enough. Then the leeches would be harvested and sold to seafood markets.